I think it's safe to say that the Premier League is back. Yeah, I mean there was stress, reprieve, relief, and although this video is going to deconstruct from a tactical point of view, Aston Villa 0, Arsenal 2. From an Arsenal perspective, let's take a moment to thank David Raya and Leandro Trossard. No, seriously, thanks guys. Welcome back to the Harvey Gratian YouTube channel. I'm so glad you found us or are joining us once again. And yes, Arsenal definitely have these two to thank, but the game on Saturday had so much more in it for me to discuss, and we're going to be focusing today on how Aston Villa were so impressive out of possession, but how Arsenal adapted throughout the game to combat this, minutely analysing Arsenal's own build-up and their own tweaked press out of possession. There is lots and lots more to cover on the way too. So, with all this to come, let's get straight on in with it and with our first tactical deep dive of the season on this channel. We're going to start with completely unpacking Aston Villa's updated 4-2-4 press against the Arsenal build-up, looking in detail at the Gunners' central access problems at times, my solutions to it, and how these were actually put into practice in the second half. First, let's lay out this changed Aston Villa and their approach out of possession in their 4-2-4 mid-block. McGinn and Bailey positioned themselves narrow initially either side of Watkins and Rodgers, ready to trigger the team's jumps when the ball was passed back by Arsenal to one of their wide centre-backs. Watkins and Rodgers had different jobs. They initially matched up with our pivot, which in settled play was Jurrien Timber and Thomas Partey mostly, and between Watkins and Rodgers, one of them would press the ball while shadow marking their pivot man. But Villa's press had more nuance to it still. Our biggest threat last season when we played Aston Villa in those two defeats was those off-the-shoulder movements from Kai Havertz to stretch their back line, and, as Arteta said in his post-match comments, Onana in particular had a different role where he would track Declan Rice's stretching movements to form a back five at times.
The holding midfielder had a very specific behaviour with our attacking midfielders as well. We have to find something else, and the moment we understood the game, we created more and more problems.
And this gave Onana a dual role where he had to then hustle back into the pivot next to Youri Tielemans when the ball was switched across to Tielemans' side. But remember that Arteta quote that I just brought up? I want you to focus on the last bit of it for today's video in particular. The moment we understood the game, we created more and more problems. I think this anecdote sums up my analysis today, so stay tuned, because with this mid-blocky, jumpy and trigger-based Aston Villa front four, it was clear to me that the key in our build-up for Arsenal was how we create our passing lanes. How do we expose the sizable distances Onana and Tielemans had to cover in the middle of pitch in their narrow pivot? How do we position and how do we overload the midfield to open up new access routes behind the front line of that Villa press, whilst simultaneously not allowing them to squeeze up the pitch and contain us? We're going to get on about how Arsenal set about trying to do that in the second half, but first, it's really important that we look at the passages of play that showcase the Aston Villa plan and our initial difficulty accessing the central areas. Straight away here, you see Jurrien Timber moving inside, Rodgers taking him up as Bailly squeezes onto Gabriel. Now, out of the picture here, Amadou Onana follows Declan Rice into the back line before the ball makes its way over to Ben White, where McGinn now applies pressure and Onana skips back into the pivot. And as of yet, there hasn't been too much of an attempt from Arsenal at this point in the game to disorganise this Aston Villa block. The passing lanes to our pivot have been really well regulated by Watkins and Rodgers, and any passes around the sides of the block are relatively harmless, with it being Bukayo Saka or Gabriel Martinelli pivoting lower instead of Rice, or most importantly Martin Odegaard, swinging into these sorts of positions to change Tielemans' discipline. For example, if it is Odegaard we're talking about, change his discipline in the pivot. Does he stay or does he go towards Odegaard and open up that third passing lane into midfield? And at half time I posted on X that need for us to find that 3-3 base more. Why? Well, of course, as I've been alluding to, we get that extra line through Aston Villa's first line of pressure, challenging Tielemans, for example, of whether he is okay with just allowing Odegaard to pick up the balls between the lines or move out to him. But Also, the 3-3 promotes those fluid rotations that have come to be a real symbol of the Arsenal build-up nowadays, those disorganising movements we rely on in terms of finding players arriving into space, playing through presses. And in the second half, from I would say about 55 minutes in, and I think really kick-started by that Raya wonder save from Ollie Watkins, we started to see this much more from Arsenal. This was the first time I noted a real concerted effort from Odegaard to change his reception points, and this seemingly insignificant play will share a lot of details that will become more significant later on. So for now, I just want you to focus on a couple of bits here. Notice what Tielemans chooses to do with Odegaard swinging and his partner Onana pinned by Declan Rice. Also note the domino effect from Odegaard's swings, how it affects Thomas Partey's positioning, how Timber dovetails off this, and then how easily we force Villa's mid-block deep with this from a white overlap from deep. Let's continue and let's actually focus on the build-up for our first goal, because this is key. We're clearly focusing at this point in the game on stacking the right-hand side here. I think we were good to take advantage of the Aston Villa press when Duran and Ramsey were subbed on, Duran being here slightly over-eager and Ramsey caught between dropping off like McGinn or getting really tight to Thomas Partey. There is that Odegaard swing which stretches things unnaturally from a Villa point of view. Partey has time to get on the half turn here, which we know he loves to do, but look at Jurriën Timber. It's almost as if that additional body in Martin Odegaard allows Jurriën to be a bit braver in his positioning, staggering himself higher and actually moving on top of Thomas Partey, then finding Odegaard wide. This is a midfield and a midfield three here working as a unit. The ball finds its way out to Bukayo Saka, and as that right hand side threatened to do every time we attacked against Aston Villa, we formed a sort of diamond or a box shape with Partey located inside the Villa block here, and he's able to open up that passing lane to Saka with White's inside dart actually drawing Digne away. Comes back to Odegaard, who finds Saka in behind, and the rest is history. Suddenly, I think, after that goal, our build-up became much more confident, more expressive in our movements. And look at this tight midfield with Timber, Partey and Odegaard. When Odegaard swings wide and then inside, the type of interconnectedness we came to see this pre-season with Zinchenko and Jorginho in the midfield, for example. Just a couple more in-game examples to highlight what I'm saying here. Again, Duran is on his own, jumping out of the 4-2-4, opening the pass up to Ben White, who now has the option of Odegaard in the 3-3. Suddenly, there are too many players now for Villa to manage with their angles in their press. Tielemans becomes sucked out to Martin Odegaard. Rodgers suddenly has to transfer markers from Timber to Partey, leaving subsequently Jurriën Timber free to receive because Onana has remained deeper with Declan Rice. Trossard is found, who becomes, I think, a really nice reference point for our build-up on the left-hand side when we really do need it at times. Lastly, I just want to show you, I think, how simple you can make all of this look when you have the wavelength that this Arsenal team do when we are confident, and that is the key, confidence. This is only a little detail, but when Odegaard makes that swinging movement, Partey is allowed, as we've touched on, to reposition higher, and with how he likes to use the pitch in his angles, this often opens up a heck of a lot of angles for Thomas Partey. But it's right now to switch lenses and to look at Arsenal off the ball, because there were some tweaks to how we press Villa ourselves. When Arsenal press, typically we look to squeeze on the left hand side of the pitch to win the ball back on the right hand side, but that was almost flipped yesterday. Saka set himself much higher, which effectively gave Emi Martinez the choice of either being funneled towards Nedeljkovic on the right hand side of Aston Villa's build-up, or if he wanted to go to the left hand side, he was forced to clip balls like this over the top of Saka to Luca Digne, where White was sort of hovering, ready to back up the man-to-man press. Now, before we get into anything, despite that real transition power that Aston Villa have with the long legs of Amadou Onana, Morgan Rodgers, etc., and real pace that they have at times and power in the front line, and also before we get into the Morgan Rodgers-Thomas Partey matchup in particular, which we all saw coming, Arsenal's press yesterday irrespective of this, I thought was fantastic. When we did go man-to-man, part of the thinking, I think, funneling Villa to their right was keeping Partey stuck to John McGinn man-to-man instead of following Morgan Rodgers, who Gabriel in the man-to-man was tasked with sticking to, as we see here, following Rodgers almost into the Villa box. And again, we're going to get onto that Rodgers Partey battle in particular, but I think if we're honest, with the amount of possession that we had, especially in the first half, and how we were able to limit Aston Villa's build up to channel balls to Ollie Watkins, which Saliba made sure this time that the level of effectiveness of these balls were null and void, Villa could simply not play through us. We blocked them off. However, Morgan Rodgers was the thorn in our side, but a lot of times when he ran at us and caused us problems and ran through us, it didn't actually come from the Aston Villa build. As I said, we pressed very well yesterday, but most of the time these Rodgers situations, especially in transition against Thomas Partey, came in the second ball situations or when we weren't quite set enough in the press. I wanted to find a situation of Rodgers actually being found high and free, able to run at us in the Villa build-up. This is the best I could find. Between Declan Rice and Kai Havertz, they probably sit off a bit too much, and when Amadou Onana gets time on the ball, we know he loves to pick a pass forward and between the lines. We do not really close the angle because we're not set enough, and Rodgers is found with this incisive ball, and ironically it's our pivot player in Thomas Partey this time who has been pinned deep by McGinn. Rodgers has the space to drive between the lines, but here lies the problem though. With Declan Rice yesterday, as he did last season too much, he's ultimately forced when he's playing with a Jorginho or a Thomas Partey to cover a bigger area of the pitch than someone as an 8 in our system should do. We're ultimately trying to compensate for the legs of the other midfield partner. Now, if you follow the channel for a while, you will know that for over a year I've been speaking on Thomas Partey's waning physicality, but I'm not going to use that point to jump on the wagon of critiquing him, what for now we can all see. That's not the point of this at all. The main problem that you have with Partey's physical deficiencies in transition, and in particular the Rodgers Partey battle yesterday, if you rewatch the game, is that it's not that Thomas Partey doesn't have any legs, but it's that he still jumps and he presses and he's front-footed as if he had the legs and the physicality that he had in his prime. He's front-footed where he should be conservative. As in this clip, Rice ends up, like many a time, as the deepest defender from midfield, despite being that fulcrum of our press just behind the front two. And as I've said, I was still really happy with our out-of-possession performance yesterday, but I just don't see the point in berating Partey for his physical decline, especially if you can't see the nuance to it, and that's how he is defending. To finish though, and there's loads of other stuff that I wish I could have gone into, but for this video's sake, let's finish with the little details. Let's talk about Jurrien Timber. I think it's fair to say he probably had a quieter game in terms of emitting his personality on the ball to his normal standards, but I don't think we should expect anything else when the guy is literally making his second ever start in the Premier League for Arsenal. Yet, using the context of what we were talking about in the beginning with our central access, there was still plenty of times and plenty of glimpses, even if they weren't in abundance, of what Timber gives us in the middle of the pitch in terms of press breaking, that term that I've been talking about for a while now. This passage here that I'm going to show you is quintessential Jurrien Timber. The license he has to move across the midfield line is key, and it's in tandem with Partey's consistent movements to create that back four. The timing though is the key here from Timber. It's absolutely superb. So that makes it difficult for Morgan Rodgers to react because Timber's coming on his blind side and Partey's also shifting deeper in front of him. Again, Onana in his role makes sure he's stuck next to Declan Rice. There is plenty of time for Jurrien Timber to get on the half turn and progress the ball to Gabriel Martinelli, or take his first touches in the whole game, for example. Poignantly, it's Declan Rice forming that 3-3 that I wanted to see more across the game, and in the first half especially, that fashions this opening. But then again, it's all about having Jurrien Timber, having those press breakers who are resistant enough in tight spaces, also have the bravery to play forward and through. And with a Timber with more minutes, I think we're going to see this more and more. His dismarking movements are so clever. I think for me, overall, the Aston Villa game was a definite positive. I think if we're looking at margins to improve on, I think the game shows the responsibility the players need to demand more of, especially in the build-up, and how specific tools probably still need polishing, whether that is after players being injured or after recent arrivals, or even still needing sourcing on the market. Do we still need that extra profile to push back a press? We have lots of those pulling factors, as I've been talking about, and then exploit the space our build-up creates. Do we still need that profile to spin away and carry us up the pitch, for example? Others may point to the front line, and again, that's totally fair. I'm thinking of doing a specific video on Gabriel Martinelli later next week, and how in our current game model, even if he's being found 1v1 up against his man more, you're still asking him quite often to be something he is not. Overall though, we should be super happy. We've just beaten Aston Villa, a really tough place away from home. The pressing structure was really good, and we started to look much more like ourselves on the ball once, as Mikel Arteta said, we started to understand the game more. I think inefficiencies persist, and we will hopefully look to solve them come the end of the window. But there is a lot to like about this Villa performance, and we'll take stock, and I will take stock again with a proper, I think, predictions video and overlook when the window closes. But I've got so much more content to come. I really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. I just want to say before you go, this year for the Harvey Gresham YouTube channel, this season is going to be absolutely massive. I've got big plans, and it's thanks to every single one of you for sticking by me. So if you are around still at the end of this video, as you know, I only ask you to like, comment, subscribe at the end of the video, because hopefully that means you found it enjoyable or informative in whichever shape, way or form you derive that from. But I'll catch you very, very shortly. See you later.